The scene from the Gospel according to St. John is the only moment in the Bible where we read that Jesus wrote anything at all. However, the evangelist did not record the content of those words, which for centuries has ignited the imagination of theologians and biblical scholars. The story of the woman caught in adultery is among the most moving and at the same time most ambiguous passages of the New Testament. At first glance, it is a story about one dramatic event and one sentence that changes the course of history. In reality, however, it reveals a deep tension between the letter of the law and its spiritual meaning, between justice and mercy, between human judgment and the gaze of God. A special place in it is occupied by a silent gesture that at first seems secondary. Jesus Christ wrote with his finger on the ground. It is precisely this moment that has become for the Christian tradition a space of intense theological reflection, provoking the question not only of what Jesus wrote, but above all, why the evangelist left it unexplained. In the scene described in the Gospel according to St. John, Jesus faces a dramatic test. The scribes and the Pharisees bring a woman caught in adultery and put Jesus to the test. Then Jesus, bending down, writes with his finger on the ground, and then speaks words that disarm the accusers and reveal the truth about human sinfulness. "Let the one among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." After which, when all, convicted by their conscience, depart, he turns to the woman with mercy, not denying the truth about sin, but opening the way to conversion. "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, do not sin any more." For the modern reader, this scene can be shocking, because adultery in the Judaism of Jesus' time was not understood merely as marital infidelity in today's private sense, but as a serious violation of the covenant with God. In other words, it was not a private matter of such a person. The Mosaic law treated adultery as an act that destroyed the order of the community of Israel, undermining the sanctity of marriage and fidelity to God, and therefore prescribed the death penalty by stoning. The attempt to stone the woman was therefore not a lynching, but appealed to a literal understanding of the law. In practice, however, in Roman times, the Jews did not have the authority to carry out death sentences, which makes the whole situation a trap. If Jesus Christ rejects the law, he will be accused of breaking it. If he upholds it, he will come into conflict with Roman authority and contradict his own teaching about mercy. For the people of that time, the stake was fidelity to the law. For Jesus, it was the unveiling of its deepest meaning, that justice without the truth about one's own sin turns into violence, and the law without mercy loses its divine source. The key and mysterious moment of this scene is the gesture in which Jesus does not immediately respond to the accusation, but bent down and began to write on the ground with his finger. And the Gospel does not provide the content of this writing, which from the beginning has provoked interpretations. The Church Fathers and exegetes have pointed to several main hypotheses. The first hypothesis assumes that Jesus Christ was writing on the ground the specific sins of the scribes and Pharisees, perhaps those known only to themselves. Its source is the internal logic of the scene. The evangelist strongly emphasizes that after the gesture of writing and after Jesus' words, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders. It is precisely the elders, those with the greatest religious and social authority, who leave first, as if they had been touched most directly. This interpretation suggests that it was not about a general call to repentance, but about striking the conscience in a personal way. The accusers are placed face to face with the truth about themselves before they can pronounce another judgment upon the woman. In this view, writing on the ground becomes a silent act of revelation. Jesus does not expose them publicly, does not speak their faults aloud, but allows each one's conscience to pass judgment itself. The significance of this hypothesis is profound. It shows that God's true judgment does not consist in public humiliation, but in unveiling a truth that can no longer be silenced, and that disarms violence before the first stone is thrown. The thesis that Jesus wrote the sins of the accusers was popularized by St. Jerome. It would explain why they began to leave one by one, beginning with the elders, for they saw evidence of their own hypocrisy. The second hypothesis refers directly to the prophetic image from the book of Jeremiah. O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you shall be put to shame. Those who turn away from you shall be written in the earth, for they have forsaken the Lord, the source of living waters. In this view, special significance is attached to the fact that the elders leave first, that is, those who knew the scriptures and the language of prophetic allusions best. They are the first to recognize the meaning of Jesus' gesture. Seeing him write with his finger on the ground, they immediately recall the words of the prophet, "Those who turn away from you shall be written in the earth." For them, this is not an incomprehensible gesture, but a clear sign of spiritual judgment, a suggestion that at the moment when they act as accusers, they themselves stand among those who have forsaken the Lord, the source of living waters. The elders understand that the allusion concerns precisely them, those who know the law and yet separate it from mercy. Therefore, they begin to leave without a word, one by one, not because of public humiliation, but because the meaning is grasped immediately. Their departure is a silent admission that the prophetic sign has struck the heart of the matter. A person who judges in the name of God, but does not stand before him in humility, is himself written in the earth. The third interpretation assumes that Jesus was writing on the ground a specific passage of the Mosaic law, not as an abstract symbol, but as a silent recalling of its literal content. According to the Torah, adultery was not a one-sided offense. If a man commits adultery with another man's wife, both the adulterer and the adulteress shall be put to death. Meanwhile, only the woman stands before Jesus, deprived of defense, while the man, equally guilty according to the law, is absent. In this perspective, writing on the ground becomes an act of exposure. Jesus does not argue, does not accuse directly, but allows the law itself, invoked through the gesture of writing, to reveal the falsity of the entire procedure. The accusers who appeal to Moses prove to be selective interpreters of the law, ready to use it as a tool of violence rather than justice. This interpretation shows that the problem is not the law itself, but its manipulation, the separation of its letter from honesty, truth, and equal responsibility. Jesus, writing the law in the dust, reveals that a judgment which is not just toward all ceases to be a divine judgment. The fourth hypothesis, called the interpretation of the finger of God, has a deeply symbolic character and refers to the establishment of the covenant on Sinai. According to this concept, Jesus' gesture is a direct reference to the book of Exodus, which speaks of the Decalogue written by the finger of God on stone tablets. By writing in the same way, Jesus silently manifests his divine nature and the authority of the supreme lawgiver, suggesting to the accusers that as the creator of the law, he has the exclusive right to interpret it in the spirit of mercy, and not only of the dead letter. A key element here is also the contrast between the harsh, unyielding stone and the fragile dust of the earth. While the law carved in rock served to impose an irrevocable death penalty, the writing in the sand can be erased, symbolizing the transition from the order of condemnation to the order of grace. In this view, Jesus does not undermine the validity of the Mosaic law, but restores its original meaning, showing that authentic divine justice aims at saving the sinner and giving him a chance for a new beginning, even in the dust of his greatest fall. All the presented hypotheses, though different in detail, lead to one fundamental conclusion. The gesture of writing on the ground is not a marginal addition to the scene, but its theological center. Regardless of whether Jesus wrote the sins of the accusers, recalled the prophetic words of Jeremiah, or cited the Mosaic law, the same reversal of perspective always takes place. The stone falls from the hands of the accusers before it touches the woman's body. Silence and gesture prove more effective than polemic, and the truth about human sinfulness disarms violence without a single act of force. Ultimately, this scene reveals that the law of God is not abolished, but fulfilled, not by a harsher judgment, but by mercy, which does not deny sin, yet does not allow it to be the final word over the human person.